Hello and welcome to DPM 2012 Management using SCOM 2012. My name is Chris Butcher. I'm a Senior Support Escalation Engineer for Microsoft, working in the Data Protection Manager team. Today's presentation, we're actually going to go over several items that will be broken up into two parts. For part one, we will cover DPM 2012 with a real quick overview on some of the new features that came with 2012, and I'll also be talking a little bit to what was released with SP1 where applicable. We'll look at the remote administration option that was introduced with DPM 2012 and compare and contrast that to the central console and how that would be used. We'll look at the discovery process that Operations Manager uses and how that relates to Data Protection Manager and how that ties in. We'll also look at the new UI through the Ops Manager console. We're going to look at how alerts are driven, and then we'll take a quick look at role-based access control. This presentation for part one will cover the first three bullet points going through the central console, and then for part two we'll cover discovery, UI alerts, and role-based access control. So for the DPM 2012 overview, this is some of the enhancements that came with DPM 2012. First off was the SharePoint ILR, where we were able to optimize the way we restore SharePoint items. In the past, we had to restore an entire content database in order to get any single item out of that, and we've now optimized that process to where we can just mount it and pull the items out, and that really takes a big chunk out of the amount of time that it took to do that. We've enhanced the way we do Hyper-V Express fulls. In DPM 2012, it was only for standalone Hyper-Vs. DPM 2012 SP1, it now has carried over to CSV Hyper-V protection as well, in that we're just going to be tracking the changes and only bringing changes over on the Express full. The process has increased the efficiency, and there's a huge change in how fast we're able now to take backups now that we're only tracking the changes. We did enable RBS support for SQL or for SharePoint. If you're using the SQL file stream for your SharePoint backend, we can now protect that SharePoint farm. And then also we made some changes to our tape media management with co-location groups. They're now always on, and we can kind of group by protection groups. It gives the user the ability to make these changes versus having DPM automatically make those selections for you. Some of the additions that came with DPM 2012 is that we have enabled users to be able to protect computers using certificates versus just using the users. This is primarily aimed at workgroup or untrusted domains, where we formerly had to create a local user on the machines. Now we can do this using a certificate-based system. We have extended our data source areas, and as of DPM 2012, we added VMM to the protectable items. And as we get more items approved internally, we will be able to protect more and more Microsoft applications. And finally is the central management. This is what this will cover today. It deals with two options. One is remote administration, or two, central console. And these are brand new for DPM 2012. It was one of our biggest requests, and we finally have integrated these options in, and we'll cover today what that looks like and what you will need to know about that. First off is the remote administration piece. For remote administration, there's really two pieces that we look at. One being the central console, which is the integration with Ops Manager, and the other being the actual remote administration itself. So when you say remote administration, it's really one specific piece is the remote administration. And with previous versions, DPM 2010 and backwards, we had to actually do an RDP session to each individual DPM box. So what the remote administration does is it enables administrators to be able to launch just the DPM UI from a given workstation to allow you to pull up the DPM UI and manage that server without having to connect via that RDP session. Some of the pros to this is it doesn't really require any additional software like the other, centralized management, which requires Ops Manager. And it gives you the familiar DPM console. We're already familiar with that. We've been managing DPM, so you're going to see the same UI that we're used to. The cons to this is we're still going to have one console open for one DPM server. We can't have a single pane of glass that shows all of our DPM servers. So it's just going to be a one-to-one relationship. And you are going to still have to be a local administrator on the DPM server in order to run this UI remotely against the DPM. So what it looks like after you've installed it on your workstation is you would get the two icons that we're used to seeing, one for the DPM and one for the DPM PowerShell management shell. When you open this, it's actually going to prompt you the name of the DPM server you want to connect to. Once you designate the DPM server, it will open up, as I said earlier, the DPM UI that we're all used to seeing. And you'll notice highlighted in yellow at the top, it's got across the top the actual name of the DPM server that we've connected to. So you can tell when I have this UI open, I am connected to, in this case, WC DPM L2C. And then at the bottom, you'll see there's actually a separate console or separate UI session for each DPM server that I would be connected to. So that part of it, the remote administration, is very simple. Again, it's just going to connect to the remote DPM server and give you the UI that you're used to. The central console is a very different approach to this. The central console is actually a tie-in to Ops Manager 2012, which allows you through the Ops Manager UI to manage all of your DPM servers and see everything that's happening on all of them in a single pane of glass. The pros to this: all the DPM servers in the farm can be managed from a single location. There are limitations to this, and I'll cover those in just a bit. But for the most part, if you've got 5, 10, 15 DPM servers, you put an Ops Manager agent on all of them, and then within there, you can see if there's any alerts. All the alerts would come into one location, so you'd be able to see that from all the servers. If you wanted to see all of your SharePoint protection, any server that's protecting SharePoint, you would be able to see that in a single location, so that it really makes it easier to manage and look at all of your entire farm without having to go from one machine to the next. It also gives you the ability to assign specific rights. Using role-based access, you can assign a user a very specific set of rights that you want to give them to say you can do these tasks, limited or full control, whatever, and it allows you to get users in without giving them full control to everything. The other big thing is that it scales back notifications. In the past, if you, for instance, lost communication to a DPM server, or a DPM server lost communication to a protected server, then all of those protection groups would end up failing, and you would have a ton of alerts, and every time it would try to go in and do it again, it would be another alert. Well, in this case, Ops Manager is going to see that all of these protected data sources fall under this one agent, and we have an agent communication failure, so all of those, it's going to consolidate into one to take away all the extra noise that we're used to seeing. Some of the cons to using this is that it does require the Ops Manager 2012 infrastructure, so if you're not familiar with that, that's something you would have to learn and set up. and we're not going to be covering the installation or the setup of Ops Manager, so that's something that you would have to figure out. And there is a slight learning curve because Ops Manager, if you're not familiar with it, is obviously a whole new piece of software, so you're going to have to learn the navigation and the UI and how to get around in Ops Manager. So some of the things that we would see in Ops Manager is this is one of the main views there, and you can see that we've got our infrastructure alerts, our state views. In this situation, I just selected on protection groups, and from there we can see all of our protection groups in one view. This allows us to be able to say, go in and see what our protection groups are. You can see our protected servers where we could list them out. With each one, you'd be able to list out the actual DPM servers. And you can see here when we magnify on that pane specifically that it's going to give us the state, so if it's healthy or not. All of our protection groups, you can say, look, I realize I've got one protection group that's failed, and you could very quickly come in here and get to that. You could just sort on state and see which ones are in a failed state and start to work on them there. Also, each individual area will have its own specific tasks that you can do, and you'll see those over on the right hand side. These are protection group tasks where we can manage the protection. We can resume disk backups, for instance, if something failed for this protection group and it's got 20 databases, it's SQL protection, and we've resolved that issue. Now we want to go back in and tell it, okay, start back where you were. One click, we can just click on resume disk backups and those will resume. Similarly, if we were having some sort of tape communication issue and we have that fixed, we can click on resume tape backups. Again, it will queue up all 20 of those databases and start them running for their tape backups. So you can see we've got a handful of these. Some of these tasks will open up a DPM UI. Some of them will just kick the task off and set it running. So it's really nice the way it ties in, and it's given us our ability to do a lot of work without having to, again, go to each individual machine and do connections. So some of the considerations, and this is where we'll see some of those limitations that I talked about for the central console. If you have a single Ops Manager server with SQL server and the management server all together, you can host up to 10,000 data sources. You can get up to 50 DPM 2012 servers. And the recommended hardware for this is at least 12 gig of RAM and enough storage space configured in the RAID. If you have multiple Ops Manager servers with SQL and Ops Management on different servers, in that situation you'd be able to host up to 50,000 data sources and up to 100 DPM 2012 servers. And in this situation, they recommend 12 gig of RAM on the Ops Manager server and then another 8 gig on the SQL server. And all of these recommendations can be found at this link. A couple other things to be wary of. If you're managing through Ops Manager an environment with more than 2,000 data sources on a single DPM server, then there's a couple of registry keys that you're going to want to put in. So these again are in that same link that was on the previous slide, but just some things to be aware of. And for planning purposes, the Ops Manager data warehouse database size, for every 100,000 entries, it requires about 6.5 gig of disk space on the database. And there's also a couple of things that will help calculate that, to calculate the number of backups in an average day. And say this one more time, that the link on the previous slide has all of this information. Finally, a quick note: if you're working over a LAN and your DPM server is remote to your Ops Manager server, then the scoped console that DPM will, or Ops Manager will try to open against a DPM server, if you have a latency over 15 milliseconds, the console will appear to work. It'll come up, but it's going to be unresponsive because of that latency. So if you start getting into a situation like that, make sure you determine what the actual connection is between your DPM server and your Ops Manager server. All right, so we'll do a quick demo. We'll take a look at the Ops Manager agent, the management pack, and the central console installation. Now, I've already actually got all these installed and running in my environment, but we'll kind of take a quick look at where they are, and how you would get them up and running. So in my case here, I've got, this is one of my 2 DPM servers. This one is the other. And then we'll look at my Ops Manager. This is coming at an approach from somebody like myself. When I came into this, I'd supported DPM for a long time, but I wasn't that familiar with Ops Manager. So there was a lot of learning and a lot of pieces to this that I wasn't familiar with. The first thing that you'll want to do once you have Ops Manager up and running is install your Ops Manager agent on your DPM servers. In order to do that, it's done through this Discovery Wizard, which can be launched right here. And you would just walk through this, tell it where your DPM servers are. You don't have to tell it anything specific, just tell it Windows computers, and here's the DPM servers, and the agents will get pushed out. Once that piece is done, we're going to look at getting the management pack installed. We can have an Ops Manager agent on your DPM server, but the pages here that show that we have System Center 2012 SP1 Data Protection Manager, this is not going to show up until we have the management pack installed. That also is going to be done through the administration. You have your management packs here. When you get to the management packs, you just right-click and import a management pack. Point it to your DPM installation media. Worth noting that your Ops Manager and DPM have to be of the same version, so they either have to both be 2012 or they have to both be 2012 SP1. And once you get this, you click on Add, and from disk, at this point, it will go out. You'll navigate to, again, your DPM installation media. Within that media, you'll see that we have a management packs folder. And within there, you'll have all the different languages. When you get to that, you'll see 2 different management packs. You import both of them. And once that's done, you will be able to go back to monitoring, and you will see all of these views. Now, these will not automatically populate until the discovery process happens, and we'll discuss the discovery process in part 2 of this series. The final piece is, once we have the management packs installed, is that we have to have the central console installed, and that is done through your DPM installation media. And apologize, I thought I had that pulled up. But through your DPM installation media, when you launch the setup, you will have an option to install DPM or the operation or the central console. So that's where the actual central console gets installed. That does, again, get installed on your Ops Manager server in order for it to be able to have the files to pull up the UIs and be able to communicate then and attach to the actual DPM server. So that's it for part 1. In part 2, again, we'll talk about the discovery process. we will get into the UI more specific, and we'll actually have it open up and connect to DPM servers, so we'll see what that looks like. And we'll also then look at the role-based access control. Thank you very much.